I come across. All right. Well, again, thank you all so much for giving me a little bit of background information on your familiarity with this PowerPoint. I was really hoping not to reinvent the wheel, or to create something that's already out there. And so, in scouring the TEA resources, I found this PowerPoint, and I think, based on how I present it and the discussions that we have, I do believe that it will have value, in helping you pass your second round of calibration. So, let's go ahead and jump on in. Obviously, you guys are familiar with the proficiency level descriptors because that's the rubrics that you all used, in your first calibration attempt. And so, those rubrics, lucky for us, they've been around for a while and haven't been revised. And so, it's important to look at those very closely as we're going through, the calibration. And so, there are different rubrics, obviously, for, reading and writing, just because we know at K-1 there's going to be a lot of differences between what the expectations are for writing than in 2 through 12. And so, when you're looking at the PLDs, it's going to be important to pay attention to that top part. And then I'm going to share with you some key words from each section of the rubric. So this is just the top band of the PLDs, and it gives a very high level overview of what the student should be able to do, for each of those proficiency levels. And you'll notice that really there's not a huge difference between advanced and advanced high, right? They either need some support or they need minimal support. Where we see a big difference is when we jump down to intermediate, and beginning. So, putting it out there to the group, what do you find to be the two domains that are the most difficult to decide between? Because, we're looking at a kid, we're never like, oh, is it beginning or advanced? We're always on the fence. And so I'd like to just kind of know, out of this group, what are the two domains, or proficiency levels that you feel like are the hardest to decide between?
Advanced and advanced high.
Okay, okay,
For me, it was between intermediate and advanced.
For me too.
okay, okay. Anyone different? Okay. And all right, all right. So tell me a little bit, can I dig a little bit deeper and just ask, like, what are some of the things that maybe trigger that uncertainty?
The second language acquisition support was, I think, the part that really kind of like got me a little confused, because I know they receive support with advanced, but I think I'm unable to differentiate like what's a minimal amount and what's just the support.
Mm, okay, okay, awesome. This is helping me. This is going to help me, make sure that I tailor this to your needs. Okay, so for those folks that are between intermediate and advanced, what are some of the hiccups or some of the red flags?
It was kind of hard with the videos, with listening to them speaking. The writing was easier for me to kind of determine what level they were at, because I'm, I guess, more of a visual person. But the speaking was just harder because I'm like, I don't know, I think that's advanced, but then I get it wrong.
Okay, okay, this is good. Yeah, those videos, that's different. It's different. You have to approach it differently than you do in the writing. So that's important to that. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is one of the big differences, right? We haven't been doing listening and speaking in 2 through 12 for, I think it's been about 4 or 5 years. That's when it went online. So it's been a long time since those upper grades had to calibrate in listening and speaking. But the videos, even then, with the upper grades, that was always the hardest part, was watching the videos, because you can pick apart language on a piece of paper, right? It's easy. right, anyone else before we keep going? Okay, well, let's jump into the listening PLDs. So, like I mentioned before, there's going to be some keywords, right, that you're going to want to really pay attention to. Now, I'll admit, never done this training virtual. In the perfect world, I would have these printed out, and you would all have highlighters in your hand, and we would be highlighting keywords. So, if there's any way that you are able to do that as we go through it, or even jotting down these keywords, but some way to recall the information that I'm about to call out here. So the first thing I want to kind of address is the BICS versus the CALPS. So the basic interpersonal communication skills versus the cognitive academic language proficiency skills. How many of you are familiar with those terms and what they mean?
Well, I heard them during our ESL training last time, ESL review for ESL certification, because I attended, last Saturday and the week before that, like for two days.
Yes, that's a good
And they talk,
connection.
sorry.
No,
so
go ahead.
The speaker talked about BICS and COP.
Awesome. That is a really good connection. Yes, knowing the difference between those two is going to help you pass your ESL certification, and it will help you implement these PLDs with more accuracy. So the BICS, the basic interpersonal communication skills, BICS, basically refers to the social language that students are able to use in social settings, right? So if you notice throughout this rubric, you'll see the words academic and social, right? So whenever you see those words, whenever you see social, you got to think BICS, right? Those are the basic interpersonal communication skills that students need to participate in those everyday conversations. So in the lunchroom or on the playground, or can I go to the bathroom, or can I sharpen my pencil, right? Those are basic interpersonal communication skills, BICS, and you'll see those in the beginning and the intermediate domains. And then there's the CALPS. So the CALPS is CALPS, the cognitive academic language proficiency skills. And you'll notice the keyword there being academic. And so whenever you see academic on the rubric, you're going to think of the CALPS, and that's the language, the academic language that students need to be successful in the classroom on the state test, or on an academic test in an academic setting. And so we see the CALPS developing when we get to the advanced and the advanced high domains. So for those of you that are having, trouble between distinguishing intermediate from advanced, the main difference between those two is their transition from the BICS to the CALPS. So looking here at this rubric, you'll notice that under intermediate, usually understand simple or routine directions, simple discussions. When topics are unfamiliar, that's when they're going to need a lot more support, right? So unfamiliar meaning not a social setting. Then when you move into advanced, you'll see they usually understand longer, more elaborate directions and some unfamiliar topics, but still support's needed. And you'll notice the level of supports is reduced from intermediate to advanced. But the difference is that they're able to address some of those unfamiliar topics, whereas an intermediate student, they would need a lot more support, and they would still struggle to participate in an academic listening exercise, right? So we're talking about listening. So their response will tell you how well they understood. And another thing on the videos, right? Because listening will also be a part of the videos, is that they have ability to see clarification, right? So from beginning to intermediate, you'll notice they're just gonna have that blank stare on their face, right? Versus intermediate may ask a question, but it may be a broken question, like, don't understand, I don't understand, or can you say that again, right? And then the advanced students, they may ask you to repeat it again, but only if the topic is really unfamiliar and highly academically challenging. Now, moving over to the advanced high, the main thing here is comparable to their native English speaking peers, right? So, right there on that second bullet point, a level nearly comparable to native English speaking peers. So, that is the point where the students are kind of presenting themselves as a native English speaker. They would not really ask for any clarification. They're going to be able to keep up. And if they need any support at all, it might be like one thing that they might get that they need that other kids don't, the other gen ed kids. So that's listening. Any questions so far? How are we feeling about the BICS versus the CALPS? I know I'm putting y'all, I know it's after 4, and I'm putting y'all out there. You're all cameras off, but at least you could do is unmute or put it in the chat if you're sitting at home, like, how are you feeling at this point in the training? I just want to stop and then see and check in.
I think it's a little clearer now. Like, for me, I just probably need to really be looking at the rubric more carefully as I'm doing the test.
Okay. Now I'll give you a pro tip here. And I was gonna save this one to the end, but here's what's always worked for me. When going through, and y'all, I've calibrated every grade level, every single grade level, K through 12, successfully calibrated. And so one of the things that, just a little trick, is when you're rating the students and you decide, Maria is intermediate, you're going to write Maria's name down right here in this space at the bottom of the intermediate column. You just write her name. And you do that for every single kid. And at the end, before you submit, you're going to go back and you're going to compare those kids. So let's say I've got Jose over here in beginning and Maria over here in intermediate. I'm going to go and watch Jose, and then I'm going to watch Maria. Because this is not timed. You can take all the time you need. And I know some people, the first one done passed, the last one done passed, and you're like, I don't know how much time to spend. But if you go back and you watch them in order of how you wrote their names down, then you should be able to see the progression, and it should be very obvious the difference between those 4 levels. So that has always worked for me. It takes a little extra time at the end, but it paints a clearer picture, because when you're getting the prompts on the calibration, they're giving it to you all out of order. And so, by the end, you're just feeling like you've been spun around 5 times and you don't know what direction you're facing. So it helps to just go back and watch them in order and see the kids progress in their language. All right. So continuing on, here's some things that you will probably see in a video, right? Almost all of these will lend themselves to a video. And so, and sometimes it's hard to hear the kids, but it's really, for listening, it's about how they're reacting, right? So that very first bullet point is probably, the most important one, because their reactions will tell you if they're seeking clarification and how much clarification they're seeking, if any. And that will kind of guide you to get in the right domains, and then you dig a little deeper into each bullet point. If you pick apart each one, something is going to be more prevalent, right? So just going back up here to the rubric, each domain has 3 bullet points. And if I'm stuck between intermediate and advanced, go through each bullet point. And if there's 2 in intermediate and 1 in advanced, give the kid intermediate, because the majority of it is in that domain. So they may demonstrate characteristics from different domains, but you just got to go with where the majority of the evidence is. If you can find evidence in more in one domain and a little evidence in another, then go with the big where the big evidence is. Okay. So we're not going to go through all of these because this would make this more than an hour. This little workshop here. But here's an example of what a beginner listener might understand. So in short, those were the words that they understood. Here's an example of what an intermediate listener would understand. Same message from the teacher, but the words that they will understand are highlighted in red. So you see a little bit better understanding, but still there could be some misconceptions there because they heard you have to bring note, parents, school, go with us. So they might think the parents are going to go with them on this field trip. But see, now here's my advanced listener, back to school, not be able to get on the bus with us, right? So this one is talking about that if you don't bring the note back, then you won't be able to go with us. And so, again, that's just a little bit more. This is what the advanced high listener is going to understand. So it's that last part for a beginner, they wouldn't understand anything. For an intermediate, they might have some, they might not, they might think they understood, but they got something different out of it because of their limited understanding. And then, of course, our advanced kid up here, they didn't get the word signed, right? So they might bring the note back, but it might not be signed. It's just really interesting to see those differences. Okay, and then we're going to skip over these. There's some more examples, and let's go to speaking rubric. Okay, so for the speaking rubric, what we're noticing here is they're speaking, obviously, right? But one thing that I heard someone say was, well, that sounded pretty good to me. And so what you have to ask yourself is, are you accustomed to understanding students who speak with a foreign language accent? Because the last bullet point in each of these domains typically uses pronunciation that significantly inhibits communication. Like you're not going to be able to understand them. They might even speak back to you in another language, you know. And then here, use pronunciation that can usually be understood by people accustomed to interacting with ELs. So if you are accustomed, like, to understanding people, and it's funny because when I'm out with a friend who's a monolingual speaker, maybe, you know, hasn't traveled a lot or doesn't have a lot of foreign friends, they might be hearing someone say something in a heavy accent, and I could understand what that person was saying, but my friend can't because they're not accustomed to interacting with people that speak other languages. So you have to examine your own biases in the speaking, and it's not a bad bias. It's just it's your life experiences that make you able to understand people with accents, kids with accents. And so, and it's even harder if you speak another language, right? So for us, if anyone on the call is bilingual, you kind of have to take that Spanish out of your head because this is not the way you apply this rubric is really looking and taking out your own biases and your own background information. So if like your friend that isn't used to understanding people with accents, if they couldn't understand this kid, then they're probably intermediate, right? But if you can understand because you're accustomed to that, then they're probably intermediate, right? But again, if you're moving up to the rubric here, it says that can usually be understood by people not accustomed to interacting with ELs. So if I understand people who speak with accents, then I may rate them intermediate. But if my friend wouldn't understand them, right? Wait, I might be confusing myself. Understood by most people not accustomed to interacting with ELs, right? So again, if my friend could also understand them when normally they don't interact with people, then they would be advanced. So that's a big difference between intermediate and advanced, is the listener themselves, and if they're accustomed to hearing accents or not. Another one that's really important here is the vocabulary. So we talked about the bics versus the cows, right? Here in this second bullet point under intermediate, you'll see speak simply using basic vocabulary needed in everyday social interactions and routine academic concepts. So thinking about those routine academic contexts, there may be some routines, but they're academic. And so they will be able to have success there, but they're not going to be able to elaborate a lot. And then here you'll see speak in detail on under advanced, second bullet point. It says can usually speak in some detail on familiar topics, right? So they can elaborate, but only on familiar topics. And then the more abstract that topic is, the less they will be able to elaborate. And this is my favorite one over here in the advanced high, idioms and colloquialisms. So when you're listening to the kids speak, think about how some of our native English speaking kids, and I know this is probably not super relevant to K-1, but some of the kids use words like, like, oh my gosh, and, just think about how some of our native English speaking kids sound and some of those little phrases they use, because those idioms and colloquialisms, oh, it was raining cats and dogs, right? If you hear kids using figurative language in their speech in K-1, and remember, this is the speaking rubric for K-12, but there's not a different rubric for K-1. But if you hear kids in kinder or first grade using those types of idiomatic expressions that is comparable to a native English speaker, then that's when you got the advanced high, right? Our advanced kids aren't going to be using idioms or little phrases that, only we hear like our English speaking kids using. And then the last thing I want to point out is the grammar. And this is a common thread in the speaking and the writing, because what you have to remember is speaking and writing are both expressive language domains, right? So we're looking for kids to be able to take whatever words they have inside of them and produce, whether that's on paper or orally, but we're looking for the production of language versus listening and reading is receptive language. You're just taking it in, right? So it looks a little different. But in the speaking and the writing, you'll notice the third bullet point, third bullet point talks about the differences between the grammar, the tenses, right? So just looking here at the third bullet point under intermediate, you'll notice that there's some English grammar awareness, speak using mostly simple sentence structures and simple tenses. And they're only going to speak in the present tense. So the present tense being the key word, right? There. They're only going to use the present tense. That's it. An intermediate kid is not even going to try or be aware of past or future tenses. Then look at this bullet point under advanced. Now we see present, past, and future. So we're including present and past and future. Now we're expanding to 3 different tenses. And then when you look at the third bullet point under advanced high, you're going to have that complex sentences. It's going to include past, present, future, and then all of those other like subjunctive, conditional, all the other weird tenses, like I would have gone, or I call them helping. We call them helping verbs sometimes, where you have the 2 verbs together, like would have, or could have, or should have, or we will go. So when you have that verb combination, that's when you're really getting into the advanced high. It doesn't say it there, but that's how you know. Again, the past, present, and future. Well, what comes next? It's all the other compound and complex verb, what do you call them? I guess tenses, verb tenses. So this, you'll see this on the writing rubric as well. All right, I'm going to pause and see how are we feeling? What questions do we have? Y'all like my wait time? Modeling for you too. When you ask a question in the class, you know, you want to stop and give the kids time to think about it. All right, let's keep on going. Thank you. All right, so looking at these different speaking activities, it may be that you'll see them. I mean, ideally, a one-on-one interview video would be the easiest one to evaluate, but sometimes they're working with a group of students, and that's the video, and you're watching how they interact with their peers. So just be aware of all the different ways that the speaking could be evaluated or coming up on the calibration. So let's take a quick look at this intermediate speaker sample. All right, so the teacher and the student are talking about pets. Would you like to have a duck as a pet? They nod. Tell me about him. Why? Because to feed him. You could feed him. Would you take care of him? Feed him with the bread. Bread. What kind of bread? You'd have to really make it into really small pieces, right? Student nods. Okay, definitely intermediate, right? What I'm noticing, and this is continues on the next slide, but what I'm noticing is that not all, the student isn't just silent and not able to respond at all, right? Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. So we're already out of the beginning phase, right? And then what do you notice about the use of the tenses? Do you see any past tense or future tense attempted at all? No, it's only present tense, which is used by this intermediate speaker. So again, we can see the difference, right, between intermediate and advanced. This intermediate speaker isn't even attempting to use anything other than the present tense. All right, let's keep on going and check out a advanced speaker. So the student talks about a time she got angry about something her sister did. My sister and me are twins. Really? Wow. What is it like to have a twin sister? I have a twin sister. I am bigger and she is smaller and we are twins. So what kind of things do you do? Huh? What kind of things do you do? I play with her. Like what? Something like a ball and we go swimming each other. You go swimming at your home, or do you go to a pool? I go to the pool. All right. Interesting. I'm going to keep going because there's more. Student talked about a time she got angry about something her sister did. I was giving her to play with it, to don't broke it outside, and she broke it and I was grumpy.
And this would be advanced and not intermediate?
Yes. Look at, they are, okay, let's go back to the rubric really quickly. I'm looking at the words broke and grumpy. Well, not grumpy, but broke. I know they didn't use it right there, but they did use it right there in the past tense. So when you're looking, right, speaking in present tense only for intermediate, this student attempted to use past and future tenses. So they do have a grasp of that, whereas that intermediate student didn't even attempt to use a past tense word. This advanced student is. Does that make sense?
Yes, that helps. Thank you.
Yes, I'm always looking at the verbs. That's what I'm always looking at, because if I'm seeing a kid and they try to use past tense, then I automatically know, like, that's not intermediate, because an intermediate kid wouldn't even be aware of past and future tenses. They don't always have to use it correctly to be advanced, but they did sometimes use it correctly. Um, she brought me another one. I was mad at my sister. So was, again, that's past tense correctly used. She brought me another one, that's past tense correctly used. So they are attempting the past tense in most of their responses when being solicited for a narrative, a story that happened already. Oh, this is a good example. I'm glad we stopped and looked at that. All right, let's keep on moving along. About 22 minutes. I'm long winded, so I just want to make sure we get to the end. All right. So here is the K-1 reading example. Or, sorry, not example, PLD rubric. So when we're looking at reading, we'll notice there are more differences between beginning and intermediate. I think this may be one of the easiest of the rubrics because there are not as many similarities. But some of the big things to look at are the high frequency concrete words, right? So when you think about those, the sight words, and also accompanied by lots and lots of visuals. This is going to be our beginner, right? And then we're moving on to intermediate. The difference, we move from words to we move from words to short, simple sentences. And so, again, they're going to be demonstrating their limited comprehension of grade appropriate stories read aloud in English, unless the stories include these items, right? So the story would have to include all of these bullet points for them to really be able to demonstrate their comprehension, and even then it would be limited, right? So you have to look at the text that's being provided to them, right? They would definitely understand that environmental print versus begin to understand it, and then have difficulty decoding the struggle is still there, right? Significantly struggle versus struggle. And then have little difficulty with English sounds and sound symbol relationships. So there's a big jump from struggling to having very little difficulty with those sound symbols. And also understanding the meaning of most grade appropriate English words. So you have to really pay attention to that grade level, because this is one of the rubrics that's specific to K-1, right? The one we just looked at was K-12, so you really have to bring it down. But this one's already brought down for you because it's just specifically to these two grade levels. So again, just looking at the most main points versus limited comprehension. And they're still going to, need those visuals, but the main difference here is how much they're able to comprehend from that reading. Okay, so let's look at a few. There's no examples for the reading part. However, there are examples of the type of reading stimuli that you would be exposed to on the calibration. All right, the last one is writing. And so this, again, is going to look similar to the speaking because it's the productive language. So you'll notice on that short, simple sentences. So on this third bullet point under intermediate, express themselves in self-generated, connected written text when their writing is limited to short sentences featuring simple, concrete English used frequently in class. But then they exhibit features of their primary language when writing. So the thing about knowing if it's a primary language feature is you have to know the primary language. So in Garland ISD, majority of our emergent bilingual students are Spanish speaking. Um, there are 70 plus languages spoken in our district. So I'm not saying that all of our kids are Spanish speaking, but the majority of them are. And so if you're not familiar with Spanish, then you may not recognize some of those features from the primary language. You might look at it and think that doesn't make sense, right? But if you know Spanish, then and it looks like Spanish, or they may be trying to use some of those letters that sound that way, or spelling patterns, then you may see that in their writing, even at the intermediate level. So if you have a bilingual teacher on your campus that could, even give you some insight into some of those, maybe even looking at the writing together with the bilingual teacher, if you're not a bilingual teacher, could help you identify some of the frequent ways that students whose native language is English and then how they write in Spanish, or sorry, other way around. For students whose native language is Spanish and how they write when they write in English, a lot of times there's common, like for example, E, the sound is an I sound. Sometimes it's an E sound, sometimes it's an I sound. But in Spanish, it's a Y. It's like the letter Y makes the E sound. So sometimes they'll substitute an I or an E for a Y because of the similarities in the sounds. I think I'm saying that right. I'm trying to think of a specific example for you. Yeah. Oh man, come on, K-1 teachers, help me out. I'm trying to think. So the Y sound, like playa, sounds like, does sound like the Y in English. Yo. Okay.
But when you say and in Spanish, that's E with a Y.
Right? It is. So that's what I'm trying to say. Is like you might see them use like a Y instead of the word and, but that would be just a complete substitution of an English word for a Spanish word. I'm thinking of like
but it still has that E sound for the letter Y, even though it's used as a word in that situation.
Okay, thank you.
If they do replace a word with like their native language, would that be intermediate then?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it depends on now a word, like one word.
Mm-hmm.
It depends, but I wouldn't look at anything that they do one time and make a decision based on that. I would try to find a pattern from one of the other indicators and see if there's a pattern across like multiple writings.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Man, I really want to think of another one that's different. Oh, the H. The H is silent in Spanish. So sometimes they'll leave off the H in words because they don't know that it's supposed to be there. Or they'll add an H where it's not supposed to be. And then in English, it does make a sound. So that's also confusing. But just kind of looking for any similarities or commonalities. And again, your bilingual teacher has been looking at those writings all day. They can tell you, probably rattle them off quicker than I can. Just my brain stops working after 4:30. Just kidding. Okay, so just moving on with the writing. Another key point here is participating meaningfully in shared writing activities. So we know, at the lower grade levels, it's not like, here's your prompt, go sit down and write an essay. Sometimes it's shared writing. And so their participation in that is going to indicate their proficiency level as well. So not being able to participate at all in that shared writing would indicate a beginner. However, if you have the students, if they're taking turns and they're coming up to the board and they're writing, and it's a highly familiar, concrete topic with high frequency words, then they're probably going to do great. But as soon as, and then look at the second bullet point under advanced, can participate meaningfully with second language acquisition support in most grade appropriate shared writing activities using the English language. So we're not just talking about highly familiar, concrete, high frequency words. We're talking about those words that are more academic. That's where we're moving from the BICS to the CALPS, right? So if the shared writing has a more academic tone, then that's when you're getting the advanced high students that are able to participate in that meaningfully, but they still need some support, right? So perhaps they might need, like, they're writing out a word and they might need help with one of the letters or two of the letters versus because that would be a little bit of second language support, right? Maybe they substituted a letter for the wrong one because they still have that native language knowledge and are applying it here in English incorrectly. And so that would still be advanced, even if they need like a little help, versus here in advanced high can participate meaningfully in most grade appropriate shared writing activities. There's nothing in there about support, right? So in a shared writing situation, advanced high students should need nothing to participate in a shared writing. Now, that doesn't mean they wouldn't need any support in a self-generated writing, right? That they're having to sit down at their desk and write on their own. They still may need a little support there. But in terms of shared writing, they shouldn't need anything for the advanced high. All right. And then here is an example of some of the different ways that the writing may appear. So again, it could be a shared writing, a language experience, dictation. How many of you are familiar with the language experience dictation?
I've never heard of that.
It's actually a really it's a popular approach, and I'm surprised to see it here like as a whole class activity, but we call it the LEA, language experience approach, and it's common in ESL and dual language classrooms where the students have a shared experience, and then so maybe they go on a field trip. I mean, that's like a huge shared experience, but maybe it's like you went out to the community garden or the school garden and planted tomatoes, right? Just for example. Then you all come back inside and the kids sit on the carpet and they kind of recount their experience by dictating it, and then the teacher writes it out on like big chart paper, and then they read it together and they notice things like, oh, look at that, is that a capital letter? It just depends on what your focus is, like periods, commas, capital letters, spacing between words, writing from left to right, top to bottom, just different things that you can notice. But the language experience is really just builds a common experience with your class, and then they come back to the carpet and they dictate it out and the teacher's writing it. So it's not a shared writing because the kids aren't getting up and adding to the board. The teacher is doing the writing, but the students are dictating it, and that's a form of writing, right? I always in the upper grades, there's a lot of expectations that words on paper is writing, but we know, if I ask that to K-1 teachers, they would be like, no, that's not true. Drawing is writing, and that's true no matter what grade level you're at. Drawing and labeling, that's writing. That's the first part of writing. And sometimes our older newcomers need to have that validation that, it's okay to come in drawing pictures and labeling if that's the English you have. But here at K-1, it's very common. So everybody's doing it. labeling pictures and objects and diagrams, so parts of a flower or whatever it is. So there are a lot of different ways that you may see those writing come up. So that is all I've got for you today. I really appreciate you guys. I know that you're out there like working super hard for our kids. I cannot thank you enough for all that you do. Teaching in 2023 it's just hard. It's hard. Like there's nothing easy about it. Underthanked, underpaid, but you are doing amazing things for the future of our country, and I just can't thank y'all enough for your service in public education. And I never even introduced myself. Sheesh. Well, at the end, here I am. I'm Tara Sowells. I am the director for the Department of Multilingual Programs here in Garland ISD, and it has been a pleasure to spend this time with you all. And I will be sure to stick around if you have any further questions, and I will stop the recording as well, just in